Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, very welcome to Stockholm and Sweden and this conference. It's on behalf of the Swedish Meteorological and Hydrological Institute that I welcome you to Stockholm and this international conference on regional climate, the ICRC CORDEX 2016. I am very glad to see that you are so many participants that have come here to Sweden from all over the world to present new findings on regional climate change research and to discuss the important questions on how to develop knowledge and data that is so urgently needed to support decision-making in relation to climate change. You know that we will be 340 participants. We are not that already, but we will be 340 participants from 38 countries from all continents. So it's a very good show up here in Stockholm. Thank you for coming here. The institute that I represent, SMHI, has a strong legacy of developing regional climate modeling to support decision-making here in Sweden and also here in Europe. Our institute was instrumental in organizing research on regional climate modeling in Sweden in the middle of the 90s by setting up the Rossby Center in Norrköping. This center has grown to become an important player in both regional and global climate modeling. The early work at SMHI has been a key in development of knowledge and data for climate change research here in Sweden. SMHI also represents Sweden in a number of international organizations. One example is that we are the focal point for the work done in IPCC. Also, since 2012, SMHI hosts the Swedish National Knowledge Center for Climate Change Adaptation, with the responsibility to provide tools and information to help society to cope with the changing climate today and for the future. This conference today is the third major conference on CORDEX. And we are organizing this conference with the World Climate Research Program, WCRP, and the Bolin Center for Climate Research here at Stockholm University. And we are grateful for their support and collaboration in the preparation for this event. WCRP are also financially supporting this conference, as well as a number of co-sponsors, including the European Meteorological Satellite Organization, EUMETSAT, the European Space Agency, ESA, the European Climate Research Alliance, ICRA, and the Swedish Research Council called FORMAS. I'm looking forward to listen to your contributions this morning, and I truly believe that this conference will promote the CORDEX vision to advance and coordinate the science and application of regional climate downscaling through global partnership. Once again, very welcome here to Stockholm. Now, I was supposed to introduce the minister. However, the minister has resigned as spokesperson, president of the Green Party here in Sweden, and she will, in the coming day, resign as a minister. Therefore, it is my pleasure to instead introduce Mr. Jan Olsson, who is Ambassador for Environment and Ocean at the Ministry for Environment and Energy. Jan has a very long and extensive experience for working with European affairs here in Stockholm and for a long period also in Brussels. And I have personally had the pleasure to working with him both here and in Stockholm in different capacities before. So it's a great pleasure to welcome you up on the scene, Jan. Welcome.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Well, weather records seems to be broken again and again. 2015 was the warmest year in recorded history. Intense heat waves, some regions hit by droughts, others saw record rainfall. Now we hear that last month was the hottest April ever. Climate change is threatening lives and livelihoods across the globe, with effects varying from region to region. It is the challenge of our time. In Sweden, warming has been twice as fast as the global average. Climate change can easily be seen in our Arctic region, and all over the world, dry areas are getting drier and wet areas are getting even more rain. And of course, sadly, those people who are already vulnerable will be hit the hardest. But if 2015 was yet another year of extreme weather, it was also a year of hope. 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals were adopted, where it is recognized that limiting climate change is crucial for reducing poverty and improving health. Then in Paris, an ambitious new climate deal. Global warming to be kept well below 2 degrees, aiming towards 1.5 degrees. The Paris Agreement also highlighted the need to increase cooperation on climate adaptation. Yes, Paris was a success. Yet the hard work starts now. We need to step up action to combat climate change. Here in Sweden, a parliamentary committee recently agreed a new climate change framework. Sweden shall have 0 net emissions by 2045. This means that our emissions will have to decrease by at least 85%. Our government is determined to make Sweden one of the first fossil-free welfare countries in the world. The government also intends to continue cooperation on climate change internationally and lead the way on climate finance. Today, Sweden is the largest contributor per capita to the Green Climate Fund and the Global Environment Facility, as well as the Adaptation Fund. Climate adaptation specifically is an increasing focus in our development cooperation. One example of this are the courses for 250 decision makers from 9 countries in Africa that the Swedish Meteorological and Hydrological Institute is running. Of course, climate adaptation needs to build on a clear understanding of the effects of climate change. And this is where the work of CORDEX is so important. To develop strategies to cope with climate change, we need knowledge and data at local and regional levels. This must be developed in the regions by people living in the different corners of the world. It needs to be done in cooperation with those working on climate impact and vulnerability, as well as with local and regional policymakers. The IPCC points to the need of regional climate data in its work after Paris, and this is also a clear focus of coming IPCC reports. Sweden has a strong legacy of developing regional climate modeling to support decision-making. Important here is the work done at the Rossby Center of the Swedish Meteorological and Hydrological Institute. A recent example, the Institute has developed climate change analysis for all Swedish counties. These are based on scenarios from global climate models that have been downscaled regionally using the Rossby Center Regional Climate Model. That allows us, for instance, now to look at detailed information about how precipitation may change in different parts of Sweden under different assumptions of global greenhouse gas emissions. Such information is appreciated and useful on the regional level. It may guide concrete climate adaptation in coming years. Dear friends, The Swedish government is pleased that the Swedish Meteorological and Hydrological Institute was selected by the World Climate Research Programme to host the International Project Office for CORDEX starting from last year. We see CORDEX as one important vehicle in the work to expand capacity for developing knowledge and data on regional climate processes around the world. CORDEX has already made substantial progress in this important field, as you know. Sweden has contributed funding to help organize CORDEX workshops in both Asia and Africa in 2015 and 2016. At the workshops, scientists from Sweden and many other nations have worked together on developing and using climate data and making scientific studies. I am therefore delighted to welcome you on behalf of the Swedish government to the International Conference on Regional Climate, the ICRC CORDEX 2016. We are proud to have so many researchers from all over the world gathered in Stockholm to present new findings on regional climate change and to discuss how to develop knowledge and data. This is urgently needed to support decision-making in relation to climate change and climate adaptation. Together we can contribute to a positive development. With these words, I would like to thank the organizers and sponsors of the conference for their hard work and wish all you participants fruitful discussions and a pleasant stay in Stockholm. And thank you warmly for bringing your dedication and this important action to the fight against climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. And you're working as an ambassador in environment and the field of ocean. And how do you see in practice that the findings from the researchers here working in the CORDEX network can fit into the work you do and your colleagues do as ambassadors from other countries when you negotiate and try to find new solutions that we so urgently need?
Well, very generally speaking, I mean, as a negotiator, I have learned how very important it is to always have a good argument to underpin your negotiation, and nothing beats good scientific data. I mean, Sweden has a strong tradition when it comes to this, the need to base oneself scientifically, and I think providing that kind of input to the international negotiations is something which is basically priceless and invaluable. So we rely really on the scientific community to come up with usable scientific results. So.
Great. So we have a big demand for the work that we will discuss here today. Great. Thank you very much, Jan, and I will ask you to stay up here on stage for a while, and I will now welcome the two co-chairs of CORDEX, Filippo Giorgi and William Gutowski. Filippo, coming here. You are head of the Earth System Physics section at Abd es-Salam International Center for Theoretical Physics in Trieste. You have a laureate in physics from the University of L'Aquila and PhD from the School of Geophysical Sciences of the Georgia Institute of Technology. And you have been working a lot for the IPCC and contributed actually to all the 5 IPCC's assessment reports. Thank you very much for being here. And Gutowski, you are a professor of synoptic meteorology at the Global Climate Change Department of Geological and Atmospheric Sciences, Iowa State University, I understand. And you coordinate the Regional Climate Modeling Laboratory at Iowa State University. Yes. And you will now present what CORDEX have done so far.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, just to start off with, I would like to, on behalf of Filippo and myself, but also the CORDEX Science Advisory Team, the International Project Office for CORDEX, and Dave Carlson and Boram Lee, our liaisons with World Climate Research Program. I welcome you all to this International Conference on Regional Climate, CORDEX 2016. Our community has made substantial advances since our last conference in 2013, and this meeting is going to be a great chance to review those advances that all of you have made, and also to help us set our future directions in regional climate research. And in fact, we have a special period set aside on Friday morning for a lot of discussion about potential future directions, and we look forward to all of you participating in that session on Friday. And keep that in mind as we go through this week. There are various issues we'll be raising that we're going to want your feedback on. And at this time, I will turn things over to Filippo.
Okay, maybe can somebody activate the presentation? What I wanted to do is, well, first of all, welcome everyone. I know almost everyone, so welcome back to the conference. I wanted to give very briefly a quick history of CORDEX for the people who don't know. Essentially telling you how we actually got here. So if you can go to the next slide. Or should I do it? There you go. Yeah. So this is the birth of CORDEX. It's been traced back to 2009. In 2009, there was a meeting in Arcachon, very beautiful place in France, of the Joint Scientific Committee, the 28th session, where there was the first call for more coordination in regional climate research activities. And I wanted to acknowledge the contribution of Gassem Asrar, who was the director of the WCRP, and Tony Busalaki, who was the chair of the JSC back in those days, because they were really very instrumental in setting up CORDEX pretty much. So there was this first call in Arcachon, and very soon we organized a meeting in Toulouse, hosted by IPSL. Also should acknowledge the contribution of IPSL. I know a few of you have been there. Michelle is laughing, I don't know why. Anyway, in 2009, we started setting the grounds for what has been what we call the framework of CORDEX 1. And pretty much at the same time, 1 year later, WCRP created a body called Task Force on Regional Climate Downscaling, TFRCD. That was chaired by myself and Colin Jones. I should also, in fact, acknowledge Colin's contribution, which was really very, very important from the very beginning. I don't know if Colin is here somewhere. I hope he will show up at some point. So this task force had the task to sort of set up the first framework of CORDEX. Then we come to adolescence. CORDEX is a bit like time goes the same as dogs. So every year is like a dog's 7 years of human life. At least this is the way I felt. Every year that goes by, I lose 7 years of life. But we finally designed the first CORDEX framework. There are 2 documents, one in the Bulletin of the World of WMO in 2009, and the Clivar document that sort of described the first sort of framework of CORDEX, and we did a lot of things, among them to set up some regional groups. And we had the first Pan-CORDEX conference, let's call it this way, in Trieste, in my institute, that you see there. Back then, we had about 180 participants, which was already a very strong participation for a beginning sort of project. Then we come to the sort of late teenage for the program. In 2012, CORDEX became was formally endorsed by WCRP. There was the establishment of the Science Advisory Team, the SAT, and back in those days it was a relatively small group, chaired again by myself and Colin Jones, and Michelle Rixen was our WCRP sort of contact point. I should also acknowledge his contribution, which has been really very important in the very beginning. So I guess 2012 we became a formal project. A bit later, there was also the creation, I think also very important, by WCRP of the Working Group on Regional Climate, WGRC. It was chaired by, well, it's still chaired by Bruce Hewitson and Claire Goodess. And we had the second Pan-Cordex conference in Brussels. This was quite a large event. Actually, there was a big sponsorship by the EU. There was also the release of the IPCC report. We had also a big IPCC event at the same time, and we had about 400 participants, sort of more or less what we have in this conference. So already back then, the sort of interest has been growing. I would say that now we are at a more mature stage of the project. The SAT has been, the SAT has been expanded. Colin moved to a new job. So he resigned as a chair of the SAT, and Bill actually replaced him. And there was, as was mentioned earlier, there was the establishment of the International Project Office for CORDEX, the so-called IPOC. I think January 2015 was the formal, or sometimes in 2015. The director was Eleanor O'Rourke. You see her in this picture of happy people in the second meeting we had at SMHI. Then she also moved along to a different position. It looks like all the CORDEX key people eventually move on to do something else very quickly. And now we have a new director. I have great difficulties in saying her first name. Irene, I would say in Italian, Lake. She's right there. It's pronounced very differently in Swedish. Boram Lee is now the WCRP contact point, and I'd like to also acknowledge Dave Carlson, the director of WCRP, and Guy Brasseur, the chairman of JSC, which have continued the support by WCRP of the CORDEX initiative. So this leads to this conference. I feel that this is a very important conference. So first of all, I wanted to thank SMHI for hosting it and for really a perfect organization. This was, I realize it's not easy to put together such an event. Among other things, so of course, we will review the status of the activities of CORDEX 1, but very important is that we are at a turning point. There is discussion, we will see, of the new, the structure of the new IPCC reports. CORDEX has been asked to give a strong contribution to that. There are many other things going on. WCRP is also going through some rethinking of some activities where CORDEX needs to be better placed. So especially on Friday, we will have a discussion of what I think we can call CORDEX 2 and how to go about that. There are many issues to discuss. So I hope you can stay until Friday and contribute to this discussion. So at this point, I'm going to, this is just a brief historical overview. So welcome everyone, and I hope we have a very productive conference. Thanks.
Tack så mycket. So we have a few minutes now to have a little chat about the ending of the opening session. Jan, please.
Yeah, it was very, very interesting to listen to you guys. I mean, as I said in response to your question, it's very important that we have scientific data and scientific basis that we can use, I mean, which is usable. And of course, what you're doing in CORDEX is sort of you're sort of processing regional data and you're sort of producing things which are, I would say, generally speaking, very usable. But I mean, how do you, as people coming from the scientific community, how do you stay in contact with the end users? I mean, they might be, of course, people who are actually going to work on adaptation regionally, or people like me who are going to negotiate. How do you stay in touch with them, and is there anything that we as policymakers can contribute to that?
I'm going to let Bill answer that question.
That's something that we're still learning how to do well. It's very challenging. The old model was we simply supply data sets to people, and we came to realize that doesn't carry all the information that they really need. It really needs to be a two-way interaction. And I think we're gradually making progress, but it really does require a lot of work to maintain significant contact so that people understand what we do, and we also understand what it is they need to know.
Yeah, well, I mean, this has been a fundamental problem for us to understand what type of information is really needed. And in some ways for you guys to understand what we can really provide. This has been a big divide. You know, people like Bruce Hughes have worked a lot on this, trying to fill this divide. But we are starting to really work very hard in this.
So a better link between the end users and the CORDEX community.
That
and
is
here
one
maybe
of the main pillars of CORDEX.
Yeah.
That's one of the our goals, our mandate. In fact.
yeah.
Yes, one of the motivations.
And that is one of the stumbling blocks that we need to work on maybe during the coming years in this community. And maybe Sweden can help here, as we are one of the end users and we are very active in this work here on the Swedish.
Yeah, of course I can't speak for any coming Swedish government, but I would expect any coming Swedish government to remain very focused on this the issue of climate change, and also on contributing to funding at the high level compared to the rest of the world. So without being able to give any promises, I think that we can all expect that to happen.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for this part of the opening session. We will change here now and go to another format. So we will leave the stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tack. Hej då. We are now, as I said, moving on to the next part of this opening session, which actually will be coming here on the screen live. It will be Mr. Filippo Lucio, who is the director of the Global Framework for Climate Services, GFCS, in the WMO offices in Geneva. He joined the WMO in 2007, following 20 years of hands-on experience in operational meteorology and research, 10 of which are as director of the National Institute of Meteorology of Mozambique. So hopefully we will now see him on the screen here.
Good morning. Not quite sure you can see me on the screen, but it looks like I have the thumbs up to start. So what I'll try to do is to run you through a few ideas of what I think should help in linking the global framework for climate services with CORDEX. Start with, I'd like to indicate that the global framework for climate services has 5 priority areas: agriculture and food security, disaster risk reduction, water, health, and recently energy was added at the 16th Congress of the WMO last year. The vision of the framework is to support improved climate risk management and eventually adaptation to climate variability and change. As we develop the framework, it's understood that there are many actors who are playing different roles. And these actors come together in the form of the Partners Advisory Committee of the Intergovernmental Board of the Global Framework for Climate Services, because it is critical that the investments, resources, and capabilities that exist within the different networks can be maximized through coordination and collaboration so that we could make progress in promoting and implementing climate services. So you see here the membership of the current Partners Advisory Committee, a membership which is increasing as we speak now. 3 more additional partners are in the process of formalizing their membership to the Partners Advisory Committee. It is very important to have those partners because most of them are involved in implementing activities related to the pillars, but also activities related to the priority areas of the Global Framework for Climate Services. And in terms of pillars, these are the 5 foundational structures which will ensure that climate services are effectively developed and implemented around the world. The user interface platform, providing for dialogues and interaction mechanism between users and providers. The climate service information system, which will be the operational backbone through which data will be gathered, processed, and eventually products disseminated to various users. Observations and monitoring to ensure that we have the needed observations to understand the climate, to predict the climate, but also to assess impacts in the various socioeconomic sectors, particularly the 5 where we put focus. Research, modeling, and prediction to improve the predictability of the climate system and eventually facilitate the development of specific tools that will facilitate the transitioning of research into operations. And at the end of the day, this exercise has to be backed up by an effective capacity development effort. Capacity development because in most cases, particularly in least developed countries and small island developing states, countries do not have the capability to either effectively produce or apply climate services. The way this collaboration can be done is by basically following a cascading process whereby we start with collaboration from global to the national level, where global we depend on the work of well-established centers, designated centers within the World Meteorological Organization structure, which are called global producing centers. And currently we have about 12 centers operational. At regional level, we want to hinge our efforts on the work of regional climate centers. We have various centers around the world who are currently undergoing a demonstration phase to basically be able to perform the mandatory functions of climate centers. And we have a few which are already designated regional climate centers under the Global Framework for Climate Services, such as the Tokyo Climate Center, the Beijing Climate Center, the African Center for Meteorological Application for Development, and CIFEN in Latin America. And eventually, from the regional level, these regional institutions will be able to post-process and provide products that national meteorological and hydrological services and their partners at the national level can use to develop tailored products to basically address the needs of the various users at national to local level. Now, in terms of user needs, we've identified a number of needs in terms of information, but also in terms of knowledge, which have been identified through a very extensive consultative process in the lead up to the World Climate Conference 3, which adopted the Global Framework for Climate Services, but also in the process of implementing specific projects, such as projects we're implementing in Tanzania and Malawi, which are providing lessons in terms of these needs. So very quickly, I'll run you through this. And basically what we have here to the left is the type of decision making that require climate information, and to the right, the type of knowledge which is needed in order to support those needs. And very quickly here we have information for 1 to 12 months planning. We have information for risk monitoring and management, and this goes from the intra-seasonal, basically, time frames all the way to weather forecasting timescales. Longer-term strategic planning for policy development, basically looking at time frames from 1 year to 10 years, but also information needed for climate change adaptation, basically projections over the next 50 to 100 years or so. We also have needs for assessing current vulnerability due to climate change, and here we are looking at impact databases to aid the development and targeting of application models. We're also looking at making decisions at local level. Here, this is a massive requirement coming out of implementation of specific projects in which users indicate that the information they are provided is quite coarse, not leading to effective decision making. And eventually, how do we make sure that we mainstream climate services for all timescales? The concept of providing seamless weather to climate and predictions and also projections, which will eventually lead to more effective decision making. Now, under the Global Framework for Climate Services, we have research, modeling, and prediction pillar. This pillar is mostly intended to address gaps identified through the consultative process. And these are mostly related to communication between the scientists and the protectionists, making sure that we have user-oriented products and services that basically reach the last mile, making sure that the end user has access to the needed information. The fact that information needs to be provided in a seamless way from the weather timescales to the subseasonal timescales to annual timescales, the decadal and centennial, but also the fact that we have, in some cases, limited predictability on a range of timescales, subseasonal being one that has benefited or where work is going, but perhaps more improvement is needed. And finally, the issue of dealing with the uncertainty at different timescales. So the research, modeling, and prediction pillar intends basically to improve our understanding of the climate system and eventually assess impacts of climate variability and change on people, ecosystems, and infrastructure, enhance the cooperation between researchers and climate information users, target research towards developing and improving practical application and information products in the 5 priority areas of the Global Framework for Climate Services, and eventually enhance the science readiness level for the production of climate projections, predictions, and user-tailored climate information and products. In terms of key priorities for implementation, we would want to see an improved availability of regularly updated, standardized climate diagnostic and prognostic information, focusing research on delivering sustained improvement of climate information identified as feasible and most needed in the 5 priority areas of the Global Framework for Climate Services, and supporting applied climate research for developing practical applications for the 5 near-term priority areas through pilots and demonstration projects that could bring together all 5 pillars or components of the GFCS with a primary focus on integration and delivery of best climate information to users and decision makers. So as I come to what do we think is critical for linking the global framework for climate services and CORDEX, I think it is very important that we look at the achievements that CORDEX has made so far. And CORDEX has been instrumental in improving not only capability in terms of downscaling, but also in building a national capability to deal and basically apply downscaled regional model outputs. And so we would be looking at linking with the CORDEX to basically support two main areas. One, capacity development through the different research lines of the CORDEX initiative, but also through projects in which we could demonstrate value of linking research with the applications, and particularly in support of those 5 priority areas of the global framework for climate services. As I said, as we implement the framework at national level, one key requirement we get is the requirement in terms of more site-specific, more downscaled climate information product and services. And eventually, how could we collaborate to promote strengthening of human capacities, particularly in least developed countries and small islands, whereby the early career scientist program, for example, could be used as a model to ensure this. And of course, the second domain of cooperation we see as critical is how could we use the current capability within CORDEX to help regional climate centers in strengthening their capabilities so that these centers, which are there as institutions to stay, could play an important role in basically supporting continually national meteorological and hydrological services in not only doing research, but also in preparing them to be able to tap on the current advances that are observed from the science field and eventually translate those into products and services. So to conclude, I'd like to show this diagram. It's not of my own construct. I borrowed this diagram. But basically what we really want to do with CORDEX is how could we go from accessing different data and products and transforming those data and products into useful information that would support decision-making in the various climate-sensitive sectors, transforming that information into knowledge which will eventually lead to communities, lead to users who will be able to effectively adapt to climate variability and change by applying all the scientifically available climate information in decisional support of decision making. So I would leave you here.
I don't know if you hear us still. Are you still there?
I'm still here.
Okay, thank you very much. There were applause for you here if you didn't hear them. We very much appreciated your contribution here in Stockholm, and I liked the last slide, which ended up in wisdom, where we will hopefully end finally. But you also pointed out, which we talked about earlier this morning as well, the gap between the science side and the practitioners and what they need. And you talked a lot about more of collaboration between the different parts here, the science and the end users, which we also touched upon before, and how to design the climate services and infrastructure for the end users, which is also a crucial part, I think. Thank you very much for joining us from Geneva, and we leave you there. Thank you, Filipe. We will now move on to the next speaker in the opening session, who is David Carlson. He has devoted more than 15 years to international science, in 1990 to 94 as the director of the International Project Office for the Tropical Ocean Global Atmosphere Program, TOGA, and after that as the director of atmospheric technology for the US National Center for Atmospheric Research. He was director of the International Program Office for the International Polar Year 2007 to 8. And since 2014, he is director of the World Climate Research Program Joint Planning Staff. Welcome.
So you see, it's not exactly a linear career. Oceanography, then tropics, then atmospheric technology, then polar. But it does plausibly lead to WCRP. It's a very interesting time for climate, both politically and scientifically, and we need collectively to make sure that WCRP is well positioned for these changes and these trends that we see. We do have regional offices. We have a office in Beijing that supports CLIVAR. We have an office in Tromsø that supports CLIC. We have an office in Switzerland that supports SPARC. And we have an office in Washington, D. that supports GWEC. So we are very delighted to have SMHI as the fifth node in that cluster. And your support of CORDEX is hopefully good for you, but it's extremely good for us. The political scene has changed greatly. Several speakers have talked about the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement is both a plus and a minus for climate, but we need to make it a plus and a plus. The minus part is that this focus on 1.5C or even 2C comes a little late, quite frankly. The climate system doesn't listen to agreements. The climate system is already ahead of us on this. But we need to convert that into a positive because we do have the country's attention, where before we might have had hostility or apathy, now we have national convergence on this issue. And so we as a community need to take that and work forward with that. I will say that it's a pleasure for WCRP to work with the current Working Group 1. You'll hear from Valerie later this morning. I think she and I would say we see each other very often, and we have a chance to continue a long collegial relationship. So I think IPCC and WCRP are in a very good condition. We are in a very good condition with respect to UNFCCC. Both Valerie and I will go from here to Bonn next days for their subsidiary body on scientific and technical advice. Hopefully they get some good scientific and technical advice. We have a very good working relationship with the UNFCCC Secretariat. So this is a little bit new territory for WCRP, because instead of strictly delivering our reports, we actually now work directly with the secretariats, and I think that's good for them and it's good for us. Scientifically, we live in a very different world. We now live in a 400 part per million CO2 world. If you don't believe it, just watch what the measurement shows at Cape Grim in the next couple days, and you'll see that in the winter hemisphere and that we also cross 400. We're at 406, 407 in the northern hemisphere. We've never been in, these are concentrations that are 3 and 4 ppm higher than we've ever been before. So we're definitely in a 400 ppm world. We're in a world where ocean acidification and ocean oxygen are now in question. At the time of my training, those were considered immutable. We would never touch the buffered ocean system, and now we know that the oceans are vulnerable in those. We live in an environment, live on a planet where, especially in the northern hemisphere, this idea that the tropics force the climate is falling away. We definitely see a polar signal in Northern Hemisphere climate, Northern Hemisphere circulation, and that will emerge more strongly, this push between what happens at the poles and what happens at the tropics. And I believe in 2 or 3 years, in retrospect, we'll say, that made a lot of sense. You know, why are we surprised by that? It actually makes a sense. And we also live in an environment where, ironically, out of the Paris Agreement, there's a sense in some countries, and anyone here from Australia knows this message very clearly, is that climate science is done. We don't need it anymore. It's solved, and now we can go forward. And there's a lot of our colleagues in Australia who are suffering from that kind of attitude from that government. So it's very positive here to hear Sweden's attitude. I hope we find that contagious for other countries. But especially this interface between global and regional is absolutely crucial for us. We can't do the global scale without understanding the regional impacts. We can't understand the regional impacts without understanding the global setting. So if there were ever any reason to reconsider the history that Filippo showed about creating CORDEX, implementing CORDEX, there's absolutely no question about it at the moment. And as your co-chairs will tell you, we've been talking with the science advisory team about ways to make CORDEX a more firm or more connected piece of WCRP, because absolutely we must maintain those regional and global connections. So I think I finished there. WCRP is proud to be a co-sponsor, but especially we are honored to work with SMHI on both CORDEX generally and on this particular event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doug. You touched upon, well, some facts that we know, the 400 ppm, the ocean question that you found come up a little late. You criticized Paris to be late, even if it was a good agreement and the best we could get, maybe. But if you remember the last slide we had here from Filipe, it ended with, after data we had information and knowledge, and wisdom is the latest and best stage maybe. If we achieve wisdom in some way, we maybe can help each other to change, so we can stop the development from where it seems to be heading right now. But what is the stumbling blocks to get the wisdom? Is it the lack of understanding between politicians and science? Is it more science that we need? What is the problem between the political side and the science side?
I think in our, and I say our, Scandinavian logical approach, we treat wisdom as a sufficient end product. But wisdom is far from a sufficient end product because it rapidly confronts emotion. And right now, globally, certainly in my country, hopefully less in Sweden, but certainly in Europe, emotion is pushing back. Emotion is fear of migrants, fear of job change, fear of deprivation. So I would say that out of AR5, we made as clear a statement, Assessment Report 5 of IPCC, sorry for acronyms, we made as wise a statement as we could, but then we ran into this emotional pushback that it doesn't get taken up. And I think right now in my country, logic says the choice of leadership should be very clear, but emotion says that the choice might go very different to how we might prefer. So I think there's a new divide. So there should be another bubble, another stage on that chart, which is uptake or acceptance. And I think to go from wisdom to that, we have to deal with people's emotions, both individual emotions and social emotions. And I don't think science actually knows how to do that, frankly.
No. And it's always this link between natural science and social science as well, which we maybe work on.
I agree with that, but I don't think social science, I don't think any science knows how to make that. Make that. And I don't mean to be grim about that. I mean, I think we're at a stage where understanding the climate system has never been more important for the survival of our social and economic systems, but we need to beginning to think in terms of how do those social and economic systems evolve in probably a non-logical fashion. That's what we have to figure out.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. So, and the next speaker in the opening session is Nina Kirchner, who is Associate Professor of Glaciology here at the Stockholm University and co-leader of the Bolin Center for Climate Research at Stockholm University. She's also a regular guest at the Department of Arctic Geology at the University Center in Svalbard. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to express a heartfelt welcome to people from our neighboring country, Norway, if there's anyone from Norway here. Because if you are here, you have sacrificed your national day for this conference, which is really nice. Is there anyone here? No.
They're home celebrating.
They are home celebrating, all right. Then a warm welcome to everybody here. A warm welcome to a cold Stockholm. But don't be surprised, because Stockholm and Sweden is actually an Arctic country. So it's probably what you should expect, that it's quite cold here. And now I just need to fix this one. Oh, yeah. I had this one here. Yes. So Sweden is an Arctic.
We need the screen
Sweden
now.
is an Arctic country, and we have actually a long tradition in Arctic research, and it started out, I don't know if you passed by the Natural Museum of, the Museum of Natural History outside. The Arctic history of Swedish research started with a person called Nordenskjöld, and he was the man who was making Sweden to a superpower in the Arctic. Because he had this boat that is very tiny on this monument here, it's outside the museum. This boat is called Vega. And Nordenskjöld sailed the Northeast Passage for the first time in 1878. That took him 2 years to come back in 1880. And exactly 100 years later, in 1980, the modern Swedish research starts with an expedition called Ymer 80. And in between, we have these famous other events that you know from, if you're a little bit into the history of polar research. What you see here to the left is the Swedish house. It's the first meteorological observation station on Svalbard that was built during the first international polar year in 1882, if I have the numbers correct. And at these meteorological stations, there were very famous guests. André was there, the engineer that tried to sail with a balloon to the North Pole, but who failed. But from history to present day, I'd like to take you at least 100 years now from the past into the present, and Sweden is still very active in polar research. I wouldn't say that being a superpower is super important in research. It's about collaboration, it's about getting together and discussing. And the Bolin Center is actually Sweden's largest meeting place and meeting platform for climate research. We have, Karen, correct me, between 200 and 300 members in the, yes, good. Between 200 and 300 members in the Bolin Center. We are not a physical center, we are a virtual one. We are spread over different departments at Stockholm University. The Royal Institute of Technology, KTH, is our partner, and SMHI is our partner. And we look at a wide range of processes and phenomena. We look at processes on land. Up to the top you have permafrost, ice wedges along the Siberian coast. We look at processes in the air circulation. We look at processes in the oceans and in the hydrosphere. And you find information about the Bolin Center in your leaflets there. And myself, I'm working with ice sheet modeling, and I look at those ice sheets that have vanished. So if you have anything regional climate forcing that I could use for the Barents Sea area, I'll be very much pleased if I could use that in my models. And with that, actually, I think I can close. I wanted to keep this very short. if you want any information about the Bolin Center, please don't hesitate to contact us. You see people here with their T-shirts, and you have contact information in the leaflet. And with that, I hope you enjoy the conference and wish you the best of luck and success for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. We are now at the point where the opening session is almost over. We will get some practical information from Irene, who are welcome up.
Okay, tack. Okay, so I'm Irene Locke, the IPAG director, and I will give you some practical information. But first of all, I would like also, as all the other previous speakers, to welcome you to Stockholm and to the ICRC CORDEX Conference 2016. So it's really nice to see all of the people here from all the different nations and corners of the globe. And I hope you will enjoy your week here in Stockholm. The weather is a little bit better than it looked at first on the forecast, so I hope we can enjoy that as well. Some practical info then. We will be here in the main hall at Aula Magna, and we will also be in rooms at the Bolin Center, the Geosciences buildings. And that is just if you go out and to the left, down the stairs, and you cross the lawn, you come to the Geosciences buildings. And you can find it all in the map in the program, and also, in your folders, but you can also find it on the web. So that should be no problem. You have emergency exits up here, all the entrances that you've been using to come in here. Also further up, if you take the stairs all the way to the top of this room. And there are also some emergency exits down here to the left. There are 2 emergency exits. Toilets are all on the entrance floor. And then for the breaks, we have coffee break at 10:15. And the coffee today will be only here in Aula Magna. And it will be on the gallery, as it's called. So if you use the top exits to go to the coffee, you go direct there. The other days, Wednesday and Thursday, there will also be coffee at the other rooms, at the Geosciences buildings, outside the largest rooms there. So that's also at 10:15. The afternoon break for coffee is at 3:15 in the afternoon. Lunches will all be served here in Aula Magna, not at the Geosciences building. And that's today between 1 and 2. The other days between 12 and 2. And Wednesday and Thursday, the lunches are in conjunction with poster sessions. Okay, so there are also a lot of side events, and you can see them all in the program as well. Most of the side events are, small groups of people who wanted to take advantage of this gathering and discuss other things, but you can find them all in there. And if you're interested in joining, you could probably find the conveners also. Today, we have an important side event. It's the icebreaker after the main program, and I hope to see you all there. What else? Yes, the Wi-Fi. You can find your personal Wi-Fi code, password and code on the back of your badge. So everybody has a personal code that is valid for the whole week. If you have any questions, please turn to the Secretariat at the main entrance. And more than that, I now hope that we have a really fruitful week, good discussions, and that we return back home Friday or Saturday with new insights and new inspiration. So welcome all to Stockholm.
Thank you.